Good morning. It is a delight to be out. If you will open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14, we will begin with the feeding of the 5,000. This is a unique account that we find in all four of the Gospels. It's unique in that it's the only one that all four of the Gospels record. What does that tell us? It's important. The Holy Spirit, the inspired writers, felt like this was such a unique and magnificent doing that all four decided to record this event. A lot of things have happened up until this point. Jesus, his fame has been spread abroad. That is the news of his power and the things that he is doing. And the leadership of the day is not happy with him. The Pharisees and the Sadducees have challenged him on every hand. Now he has the attention of Herod. And it starts out in verse 13, when Jesus heard of it. That is of the killing, the beheading of his cousin John. He departed thence by ship into a desert or a wilderness place. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. So Jesus has been very busy. Jesus has taught the people. We've just come off the heels of 7 parables. And what does the end of chapter 13 say when Jesus has this conversation? The people say, "Is this not the carpenter's son? His brethren are all with us." And what was the end? They were offended in him. They did not believe in him. And so that's the context of what's going on. And Jesus hears what Herod has done with John, and he departs unto a wilderness, a desert area. Why do you think Jesus went off by himself?
He was grieving.
Grief?
He wanted to get away from the opposition because his time is not time.
Yeah, so it was not cowardice that had Jesus withdraw himself, but it was not time for him to fully face down the opposition. His time was not yet. Jesus was in tune with his Father's will. His mission was not anywhere close to being complete. And so it was not time yet. He was wanting to be in tune and on time with the Father's wishes. And it says here that when the people had heard thereof, what does that imply? People are inquiring about Jesus. People want to know where he is. They're asking about Jesus. They're looking for Jesus. And when they ask and inquire, they hear that he is gone off by himself, and they follow him by any means necessary. Go ahead.
I think too that this, the religious leaders were obviously trying to discredit him, and this is kind of almost like a little test where Jesus goes out to see who comes and follows him, if his word is actually sinking in, if people are hearing and understanding enough to want to come out, and not listen to the religious leaders and ignore him.
Yes.
They followed him out so you can see, what was going on in the people.
Their diligence and devotion could be a check for our sometimes dullness, for our lack of diligence and devotion. But these people, were they all there for the purest of purposes?
I'm sure most of them, a good chunk of them were there to get healed.
Right.
If you think about that in today's society, somebody was truly healing, even the ones that are fake now get a huge following.
Yes.
So that would definitely draw people to them.
Sure, and those today that are doing these healings, they do so selling tickets, taking in large sums of money, and Jesus didn't do that. They were getting their healings for free. They were following, and they were invested somewhat in getting to Jesus, but Jesus didn't say, "All right, for 4 easy installments of $39.99, I will heal you, and the more you pay, the quicker the healing."
They were getting the real deal across the board.
They got the real deal across the board. That's right. It's interesting today, in this time, in this age, where people were experiencing a level of sickness that's different than what we do today. In this time, people were truly, and they were in truth, experiencing demon possession, which was for a purpose. It was so they could exercise the power of God.
When did demon possession start? Like, do we have historical? Because they talk a lot about it there. They don't talk a lot about it. My Old Testament is not up where it should be, but do they talk a lot about it in the Old Testament?
There was definitely an expectation of that being a problem when Israel would leave God.
Okay.
And so there was a promise of that going to happen, but there was also an expectation that the Messiah to come would be able to meet that problem head on.
My first thought of it is the Witch of Endor.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did her action displease Samuel, but I think God was displeased with what she was doing.
Absolutely.
And so that has to be demonic.
Right. Absolutely.
She was even surprised that she was able to do what she did.
Yeah, that was.
That's a good point. Wow, look at this.
Yeah, it shows you that there may have been, even in that day, and I think of even Simon the sorcerer, there may have even been that day those that were a lot like those in our day, that were doing things, using sleight of hand, using those things, trickery, to get over on the people.
Well, thinking of the power of Satan, it's possible, I think, that the wise men of Pharaoh, and they're on the spot, so they throw their rods. It's possible they were surprised that Satan had the power to make their rods snakes.
Right.
They may have been, oh, look at this.
Right.
But everything you guys are talking about is what you allow. When in Jesus' time, they had possession that they couldn't get rid of.
Right.
So there's a difference there.
Sure.
Do we know when, I'm still going back to the same original question. Do we know historically when that kind of, where they possessed them?
Yes, and it was going to be at the time that the Messiah would be on the scene.
So it only started prior to that.
The people were, it was going to be like Galatians 4:4 in the fullness of time. The people were going to be in a position not only in societal oppression from Rome, but from their sin, they would be looking for the Messiah, and the one that was going to take care of all of the problems. And go ahead, Gary.
Jesus had been tested all his life with people around him, and Satan's trying to trip him up. Well, he see what Jesus is gonna do, how he's gonna handle this. And he fed all of them and had some extra.
Right. Yeah. So it is like the devil to follow you in your times of weakness and grief. Jesus goes off by himself after having this devastating news that John has been murdered. Jesus surely knew that John's life was going to end. But no doubt Jesus is a man of compassion. Jesus is a man who could be touched by the feelings and the infirmities of the people about him. John and Jesus had a special relationship and connection that even began in the germination of their bodies in the womb. And from that time on, they were connected in their mission and in their message. And John never tried to overstep in his mission and his job, but truly did point people to Jesus and served God out of sincerity and out of truth. And you know that Jesus appreciated that, and Jesus respected that. And Jesus loved John for who he was, not only because they were kin, but because he had someone who was standing shoulder to shoulder with him and doing the work of God and them together. Now, John was pointing to Jesus. This is the guy. This is the man that we have been waiting for as a nation. And so I know that Jesus was touched and grieved. He goes by himself. But the people, the multitudes who are seeking him, the multitudes who are sick, this account in Mark 6 tells us that not only did he teach them many things, but he healed them. He healed all of them. And so it says in verse 14, Jesus saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Now, in a time where Jesus could have been rebuking them, can't I have a moment alone? Don't you know, haven't you heard of what happened to my cousin? Don't you know, you've been following me everywhere, and I've been dealing with the religious sects. I've been dealing with the Pharisees who have come up against me, and my own people in my own country rejecting me. Can't I have a moment's peace? He sees them in their condition, and he is moved with compassion. You know, Jesus going to find a place of solitude, a place of peace, a place of quietness, but instead he found a vast crowd, a large crowd looking for something that he could give. And he might so easily have resented them for that. But Jesus did not resent them. You know, what right did they have to continually invade his space and ask and demand of him some benefit that he could offer them? How would we respond in this situation? There was a gentleman that was on the mission field, and a guy asked them to go out for dinner. And they said, no, we're going back to the hotel to eat peanut butter. And I'll just tell you, the guy that asked them out to dinner was my dad. Dad didn't know this gentleman very well, but asked his family to go out to dinner. And they said, no, we're going to go eat peanut butter. And my dad thought they have probably mortgaged their house to come on this mission trip. So he begged them, please come out and I will pay for your dinner. And they said, no, we're going back to the hotel to eat peanut butter. And the next day, Dad had been thinking about maybe he had embarrassed them in trying to plead with them to come eat. And the guy called my dad over to the side and said, Robby, he said, you don't know me very well, but I just want you to know how refreshing it was to have somebody offer me something. You see, this guy's in the top 1% in finance in the entire world. And he makes more in a month than most families do put together in a year. And he's a very wealthy man. And he told my dad, he said, it was refreshing to have someone come to me and offer me something, because people always come to me with their hand out. See, it was a difference. And people are always coming to Jesus with their hand out. Why are they coming to Jesus with their hand out?
He was healing.
Because he was providing. He was doing. There was a...
He's rich in spirit.
Yes, he certainly was. He's rich in a lot of ways, even though that he was a man that was living, you know, the text says, foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests. The Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Not saying that he had nowhere to live, but foxes and birds have a place of solace. They have a place of protection. They have a place to get away. And Jesus did not have that. Jesus didn't have a nest to fly to get away from the people bearing down on him. He didn't have a den to go hide in to where the people couldn't find him and the people couldn't bear down upon him and keep demanding of him and asking of him of whatever they could get. He had to deal with those people pressing upon him. And so he's moved with compassion. His compassion is as great as the multitude that appears before him. The text says that there was a great multitude that appears, and that's how great his compassion is. He is moved with compassion. He is motivated by his compassion. The overwhelming emotion and the overwhelming sense of what's driving him to be who he is and to do what he does is compassion. He sees them as they are, sick. He sees them as they are, helpless. He sees them as they are, in need. And he knows that he can do something about it. It says in verse 15, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, this is a desert place, a wilderness, and the multitude, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals, buy themselves food. You see, there was a time in world history where the markets weren't open 24 hours a day. You couldn't go through, you couldn't go to Waffle House at 3 o'clock in the morning to get some food. You had a set time of what was business hours. And, you know, there are places now that run and operate around the clock. It was not so in this day and time. And so it is getting time, it's past time. If they get to the villages, it's probably going to be too late. The market's going to be shut down. So what do? We've got to send them away now anyways. It's past time, but send them out anyways. It's past time. They're going to go to a place that's not going to be able to provide for them, but neither can we. And I would rather send them away so I don't have to look at them, so I don't have to view them not having what they need. I don't have to look at them hungry. I don't have to look at them, send them away. But Jesus said unto them, they need not depart. Give you them to eat. You give them something to eat.
It's amazing that he's healing all these people and they still doubt. For him to say, you know, you give them something to eat, they said, well, we've only got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes.
Yeah. What has transpired prior to this event? It's recorded in John. It's the very first miracle that opened Jesus' ministry. In John chapter 2, the wedding at Cana. What had Jesus done in their presence that should have motivated them to have a little more faith in the in the man whom they were in the presence of, in the situation that they were facing? Jesus, they are out of their drink. They're out of their juice for this party. They're out of wine, and that's a problem. And there are no doubt thousands of people at this event. Thousands of people celebrating this wedding feast. And Mary, the mother of the Lord, comes to him and says, "You've got to do something about this." Jesus, seemingly reluctantly, says, "Fill the water pots. Take the water. Fill it up." And he, by miraculous power, transformed that water into wine. And the people marveled at his ability. The people marveled. This is better than any of the stuff we have partaken of until now. The people were well satiated. The people were, the text says, well drunk. They had consumed hundreds of gallons of drink. And yet, this stuff tastes different. This stuff is better than anything that has passed the precipice of our lips. This stuff is special. Jesus did that. You have a comment?
We've just gone past a time when there are a lot of things about the best Super Bowl commercials. And I think the worst thing that's ever done to us is the commercial, not just at Super Bowl time, but we played for years about the good stuff. And boy, it just doesn't get any better than this. And it had to do with alcohol. And it's caused most of the people I've talked with to think, well, this is obvious. That when Jesus brought that out, they said, oh, this is the good stuff. But what was fresh was good. Back then, everything else they had was in various stages of souring.
Right, of decomposition.
And compared to freshly squeezed, even if you think of orange juice, anything that's freshly squeezed is so good. And they said, why late in the feast are we getting this fresh stuff that tastes so good? Mm-hmm. To me, it's obvious that's what it's saying there, but our commercials are, oh, this is the good stuff.
Right, yeah. Jesus challenges them in this statement. You give them something. He not only challenges their compassion, but he challenges their faith. He challenges their faith in him. He challenges their compassion toward the people. You see, if they had remembered the miracle in Cana, they should have asked Jesus to meet this need and not to send them away. How soon we often forget. How soon it is that the facts that often should propel us on to greater faith and to greater victory and to heights beyond the shallow recesses of where we normally dwell, how soon we often forget those things that should build us up. They have soon forgotten what Jesus has already done in the past in provision. Go ahead.
Well, the human mind needs training and repeat. That's why we're here right now.
Yep. That's right. And we need to be continually reminded. And you know, that's the apostle said, I will stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance. As long as I am in this tabernacle, I'm going to keep preaching the same thing to build you up and to remind you and to help you remember what you need to remember and be reminded of so that we can get to glory together. It really is that simple. It really is that easy. You know, the people are hungry. And those of an empty religion offer them some empty words or ceremony, and that can never satisfy. John said, if your brother have need, and you say to him, be ye warmed and filled, and you do not give him those things that are needful to the body, that's ridiculous. That's empty. That is vain. John would say that's sinful. But that's what empty religion does. The people are hungry. And the atheists and skeptics try to convince, well, you're not hungry at all. That's not hunger. You're really not feeling the things that your body is screaming at you. You know, the people are hungry. And the people of religion try to give them video productions and light shows and awesome, motivating, and emotionally charged music. The people are hungry. And the pulpit entertainers, those loud places of entertainment and fast action, they keep the production going, if you will. The people are hungry. Who will give them the bread of life? The people are hungry. Who will give them that which will actually and in truth satisfy them? Jesus is not concerned with those things that do not have a true effect on the eternity of man. Jesus says they need not depart. Give you them to eat. What do the disciples say? They say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. Lord, we got this young boy over here that his mama packed him a lunch of 5 crackers and 2 little sardines, and we have a crowd here that we're told is 5,000 men. Now, what was a reality of that day and time concerning marriage? Polygamy. So maybe there's men there that have 2 or 3 or 4 wives. What was a reality of families in that day? How many brothers did David have? He had sisters too. My dad had 7 brothers and 3 sisters. Well, he was 6 brothers. There's 7 boys and 3 girls. I mean, how many people do we really think was in this crowd? 5,000 men. 15, 20,000? It was a multitude. It was a crowd. It was a sea of people there. I've seen video just last month, I think it was, they had CYC, and there was like 13,000 people there, and they showed the auditorium. It was a lot of people. And this may be double that. Even if it was 13,000 people, what are 5 little crackers and 2 little sardines going to do? The disciples here were focusing on the wrong thing. Is that ever indicative of what we do? Do we ever focus on the problem instead of the solution? They were looking at what was insufficient instead of looking at the Savior, that which was and is sufficient. They were looking at what they did not have, but what does Jesus do? He says, bring it to me. Bring me what you got. Bring me what you have. And what does he do with it? And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. He could have filled their bellies standing up. They could have eaten standing around. He could have given them something sufficient, but in telling them to sit down, he's saying this is about to be a feast. This has the feeling of a banquet. What we're about to endure and go through is enough. It's going to be more than enough. He tells the multitude, sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed. So often, we look at what we don't have, and we pray to God and ask him why. Why don't I have what I need? And Jesus took what he had and thanked God for what he did have. Go ahead.
Would it be okay to get into the mechanics of this a little bit, and that the surprise, even the disciples were right there with the 5 loaves, and Jesus not only prayed, but he broke it and started giving it to them to pass out, and they kept getting it to pass out. I'm thinking of the widow that told Elijah, you know, there's just enough
Meal.
and oil here for me and my son to eat, and that's it. We're going to starve to death.
We got enough to make another cake and we're
Make
dead.
a little cake first. And 1 Kings 17 said that meal did not end, and the cruse of oil did not run out. Just thinking the number of times she kept saying, well, there's a little bit more. Well, there's a little more. And it had to have been, when I say the mechanics of it, I don't think all of a sudden there was a truckload sitting there. I think Jesus kept handing it out, and they started handing it out, and it didn't stop.
Right. And it's interesting that Jesus, in performing this miracle, he did it in conjunction and through the hands of his disciples, these men who would become apostles. He did this with them. He wanted to work with and through them, you see. And what a banquet indeed, right? You've got the Lord as the master of the banquet. You've got the apostles here as the butlers. And you have for provision the very provisions of God himself. What a banquet, right? What a time to be alive for them, to experience this. You have thousands of people here. And they're all hungry, and they start with the most meager of provisions. And it is from that which looks impossible, from that which looks, it's not enough food to even feed one of the grown men there. It's enough for a little young man's lunch. One of the grown men, I think of it like a Lunchable. How many of them could I eat before I was satisfied? 3 or 4? Molly's like, this was not enough for even one grown man. And before them sit a multitude, a sea of people. Jesus blesses it. Looking up to heaven, he brake it and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. You know, it's a lot easier for us to have faith in that which we can see. That's how we like to view faith. I know it, I can see it, therefore I believe it. But that's not really faith at all, is it? Go ahead.
I would tend to think that these people, the disciples, they recognized the problem coming up. These people had to have known that for themselves, and they had the desire and perhaps the faith to say, you know what, we're just going to have to be hungry tonight. We're going to do this. They had to recognize the situation they were going to be in if they stayed.
Yeah, and it's almost a concession of, after this event, Jesus, towards the end of this event, Jesus gives some very hard truth. And many of the people go away sorrowful. and follow him no more. And Jesus asked this question, will you also go away and leave me? And Peter said, Lord, to whom shall we go? At this point in time, these people had nowhere else to go. They had nothing to do. Neither did they have the resources. But God is not bound to provide for us through resources that we can see. God is able to provide in ways that we will never discover. God is able to procure our sustenance. What did he do with the Israelites in the wilderness? He rained manna from heaven. He brought water out of a rock. He's done this throughout time, over and over, to show the human family that I love you and I am enough. And just because you cannot physically see the provisions does not mean the provender is not there. Because God is the provider, he has all the provisions. The earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. Psalm 90, go ahead.
The Sermon on the Mount, he said, all those that thirst and hunger for God's righteousness
shall be filled. That's right. Go ahead.
So besides the example to these multitude that this miracle provided, it's a perfect synonym or example to the disciples themselves, that he would create the word, he would give it to them, and they would give it to the people.
Right. And it is a beautiful picture of just that. And I'm glad you brought that up. In verse number 20 and 21, we have this. It says, and they did all eat and were filled. It doesn't say they did all eat and were held over. That they did all eat and their hunger pains subsided because they had enough, and that they all did eat and were filled. They had their fill. God filled them up that day, not only with the fact that they were able to eat this physical food that came out of nowhere, that literally just miraculously kept coming out of the hands of the Lord, but he should have filled them with faith. This guy is unlike any guy that we have ever seen. This Jesus, there's something about him. He's just told us all to sit down. They have all eaten. They've had their fill. But not only did they have their fill, they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. 12 baskets of leftovers from this massive crowd that literally came out of nowhere. Go ahead.
Christ asked them to pick it up too. They didn't do that on their own volition. Didn't like waste.
That's right.
Is there any symbolism in this and the fact that them wandering in the desert, also the 12 baskets, the 12 disciples, the 12 tribes?
I'd like to think that there is. I'd like to think that there is. There are going to be 12 men, as Steve just pointed out, that are receiving from the Lord. They have their basket full, and then what are they going to go do out in the world? They're going to go take that same bread, the living bread, if you will, that which they receive from God, and disperse it out into the world. It says that those who had eaten, they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. You know, this is an amazing account, an historical event. This isn't just a fairy tale. This isn't just something that the writers thought. This is something that could portray the power of God and the provision of God and the compassion of God. But this is something that literally and factually and actually happened. It says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. Jesus sent the multitudes away after having provided for them their every need. The other accounts tell us that he taught them. He engaged their mind with the truth of God. He healed them physically. He took their infirmities. He took their diseases. Just like the account in Isaiah said, He hath taken our infirmities. Jesus healed the people. And then he filled the people. He gave them what they needed. And then he sent them away. You see, there are three principles that we basically learn from this account. And it comes straight from what Jesus did. And I just want to leave you with this. Thank God and use wisely what you have. Be thankful for what you have and use it wisely. Trust in God's unlimited resources. God is not bound to be able to provide for that which we can see and perceive. God's resources are unlimited. And then do not waste what he does give. Go ahead.
Just as Moses fed the people in the wilderness, it is now Jesus feeding his people.
That's right. Absolutely. And now when Moses was in the wilderness and God fed the people, did God dictate and regulate how much manna they would collect and when they would collect it? Yes. And God has given these people exactly what they need. And he told them, now pick up the rest, because we're not going to waste it. We will continue on next week. Thank you so much for your attention and participation.
As you did. As you did.